AI is everywhere, from robotics in the industrial sector to natural language processing on Google Translations, but also used by interpreters and traductors, to more complex and innovative applications in international development, humanitarian context, and public policies. And yet, we still have difficulties in finding a commonly agreed definition and taxonomy around AI. But we all agree that AI is and will continue to have an impact on us collectively as a society and on us as individuals. And therefore, we also all agree that we need ethical guidelines to have ethical and responsible AI. But how to operationalize and put into practice AI ethics and human rights? Few remarks today to touch upon that subject, to lead the conversation around such a complex topic. First, it is normal that general guidelines issued by national, regional, and international authorities, as it was the case back in 2019 with the issuance of the European Commission ethical guidelines around AI, that it's difficult for those to be applicable and operationalized within your company and within your sector or within your industry. Why? Because by definitions, those set of rules are general, systemic, and supposed to be applicable in every industry and every sectors. And therefore, their operationalization is what you and me, stakeholders, need to be doing in our own ecosystem, whether in a non-for-profit, whether in an intergovernmental organization, whether within a corporation or within an innovation lab or as external consultant. Second, there is no denying that putting in place, drafting, assessing, monitoring, mitigating, replacing, modifying ethical guidelines is a complex issue, it's a complex process, and it takes time. It is also an iterative process, and therefore you will first have a first draft, implement them, review them, monitor them, mitigate them all the time. And it will be a constant iterative process as the innovation goes further along and we discover the new unintended consequences of AI applications. And therefore, because it's a complex process, I always like to go back to basic questions. What, why, who? For example, who is accountable? Who is going to be the end beneficiaries or the end consumers of my AI application? Who is going to be impacted? Who is responsible within and outside my organization? It's also useful to go back to the Asimov laws of robotics. I know some say that the Asimov laws of robotics are not covering all the aspects and all the risk embedded into AI applications. And yet, there are simple rules, they are well structured, they are human-centered, and they are to some extent even human rights-centered, and they are understandable from everyone, from top CEOs to coders to marketing people, legal practitioners, strategists, advocacy professionals. Everyone can understand the argumentation and the structure of those four key questions raised by the Asimov laws. And therefore, I will highly recommend to go back to them to frame the start of the conversation. How, again, put further AI into practice within the organization? First, what is the key principle or the key safeguard that you want to implement within your organization? Is it privacy? Is it accountability? Is it inclusiveness? What is it that you want to drive and to encompass within your development process? Second, as we have said, ethical guidelines has been on the top of the conversation for the last 5 years, and some were already issued back in 2009. And you can refer to the UN Innovation Principle issued in 2009. So what are currently the best practices within your sector, within your industry, within your partners even, or within your own organization? If you have already innovation centers, innovation labs, innovation units, incubators, innovators, what are the best practices and how can you assess them, benchmark them, duplicate them, modify them? Second is really look at who is accountable for within your organization and who is involved into this process. Certainly, a bottom-up approach is key, but involving top decision makers and your CEOs and your shareholders is key if you want to mainstream it and if you want to change the strategy of the organization to make ethics a mainstream topic and a benchmark for everyone involved in the development of AI applications. The last question that I will recommend you to ask yourself must be the most challenging and yet very needed with AI implications is, what is the benchmark? What is the thresholds under which you will say no, whether to launch, whether to design, whether to scale up, or whether to implement an AI application? The latest most relevant example I can give you on that point is the CEO of IBM who has refused to scale up facial recognition in the public sphere because of the lack of safeguards and asking public authorities, government, to have stronger regulations. So what will be your benchmark and what legacy would you like to leave? I think that in those moments, that's where you can really see that even as a coder, you have a responsibility. And by, again, asking you simple questions, you can always put in place ethical guidelines. And if you need, then you have to reach out for experts, specialists, and have a big conversation around those issues within your company.